And the ass falls down, and he stands over and cussing him, beating on him, and all of a sudden an angel appears, a man standing in the path. He said, he just saved your life. I was fixing to cut your head off. I was going to kill you. You're disobeying God. You'd be thankful to your ass because he saved you. And so that's just one of the experiences there in the Bible. Now, the angels, there are some of them who are fallen. There is some Star Wars going on right now. There's battle between good angels and bad angels. Those who obey and those who don't. Angels of darkness and angels of light, they are called. Now, the Bible describes the fall, that original fall of the angels. Here it is in Ezekiel chapter 28, beginning in verse 13. God is speaking to Lucifer, and he says, "Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God." So, before the earth was earth, when it was in its prior state, beautiful planet, it was called Eden, or a large portion of it, like a continent of it, was called Eden. Thou wast in Eden, and Eden means the garden of God. Every precious stone was thy covering, the sardius, the topaz, the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, so forth, so forth, so forth. Named 12 of them. The workmanship of thy tabrets and of thy pipes were prepared in thee in the day thou wast created. Now, speaking of a cherub here named Lucifer, the light bearer. That was his name, light bearer. And he said, "You were created. Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth." And Lucifer was created to cover the throne of God. There were 4 cherubs around it and 1 over it. And that was his role. At some point, this cherub was assigned to this planet. He may have been over this planet. He may have been the chief prince over Eden. And he had a number of angels with him down here on this planet. God says, "Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day thou wast created, till iniquity was found in thee." So he's a created being that was created perfectly, but he originated lying, the Bible says, he's the father of it. He originated sin. He was the first one to engage in trafficking, and iniquity was found in him. He said, "I will destroy thee, O covering cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire." Then God tells why he sinned. "Thy heart was lifted up because of thy beauty." So Lucifer, the light bearer, looked at his beauty, looked at his role, looked at what he was doing and what the possibilities were. He said, "You are corrupted by reason of your wisdom and your brightness." So he was very wise, and he was bright. That bright means he radiated God's glory. And so he corrupted himself because of it. Isaiah 14:12 says this, same subject. "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? Thou art cast down to the ground which did weaken the nations. For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit upon the mount of the congregation on the sides of the earth. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High." So that was his sin. To desire to be like God, he said, "But you'll be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit." Notice, he was ascending from the earth into heaven to try to take God off the throne. He was cast back down to the earth and said he would end up in hell in the sides of the pit. There is a great pit that goes all the way through the earth like an arrow piercing a ball. That shaft going through the earth, at its center part, in the center of the mass of the earth, there is a lake of fire. On either side of the pit, as you go down, there are graves, which the Bible speaks of. And the damned who have died are stuffed in those graves like wasps in a cocoon, waiting for the day of judgment. So he said Lucifer would be cast down into hell. He's not there now. He still has access to heaven, but that's where he'll end up. Now, The Bible speaks of those fallen angels in Jude and Job and Psalm and other places. I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to come back to them. First of all, let's deal with something that happened in Genesis 1. Remember the angels were there when the foundation of the earth were created. Lucifer, the light bearer, was there. And later, he dwelt on the earth, but it was called Eden, or at least that jurisdiction of where he was called Eden. So that when he sinned, the earth became without form and void. God cursed the earth, destroyed it, similar to what he did in Noah's day. Only this time he obscured it from the sun, no sunlight, no moonlight, just total darkness. It was covered, the Bible said, a swaddling blanket, like a swaddling clothes, thick band of darkness over it. Some kind of a mist must have surrounded it. And there were no more land, and it was in total darkness. And so he says, Genesis 1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved on the face of the water. So here's this darkened planet with God's Spirit moving on it. Now, 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 3 speaks of this. He said, knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days, welcome to the last days, scoffers, walking after their own lust, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. For this they willingly are ignorant of, that by the word of the Lord the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water, and in the water, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. So he's speaking not of Noah's flood, don't have time to prove that to you, but he's speaking of that prior destruction of the earth that leaves it without form and void in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 and 2. Then we read in Psalm 82:1, God standeth in the congregation of the mighty, he judgeth among the gods, little g. So God stands in the congregation of the mighty, that's not on earth, and he judges among the gods. So this mythology of gods, as the Greeks have,
not
could
those
be based on a lot of
You almost
truth.
just cut yourself.
How long will you judge unjustly and accept the person of the wicked? Defend the poor and fatherless, do justice to the afflicted and needy, deliver the poor, and so forth. They know not, neither will they understand. They walk on in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are out of course. He speaks of a time when the earth was physically in a state of decay, ruining. I have said, this is what God said, ye are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High. They were called sons of God, actually. So he said to them, you're gods, you're children of the Most High, but you'll die like men and fall like one of the princes. The princes were those princes of the power of the air, some of which met with destruction. So he said to them, you're gods, but you're going to die like men. So that's the nature of angels. They're capable of dying. They're capable of being destroyed in their physical structure. Now, like you and I, their souls will live on forever. And then that explains that passage in John, by the way. Jesus answered, is it not written in your law, I said, ye are gods? And so he's referring to that time when God said that of the angels. And now Jeremiah 4:23 and 28. He said, Jeremiah said, but lo, I beheld the earth, and it was without form and void. Same words used in Genesis 1:1. And the heavens, and they had no light. No light at all. Genesis 1:1 and 2. And behold, the mountains, and they trembled, and all the hills moved lightly, and behold, there was no man. And all the birds of the heaven were fled. There has never been a time like that on the earth from creation to this present time. Nor will there be in the future a time like this. The only time this could have occurred was prior to the 6 days of creation in Genesis chapter 1. I beheld, and lo, there was no man, all the birds of the heaven were fled. And I beheld, and lo, the fruitful place was a wilderness, and all the cities there were broken down at the presence of the Lord and at his fierce anger. So God was very angry at some point, put a curse upon the earth, destroyed it, so it was in darkness, without form, no light, no man, no birds, everything destroyed, total ruin. That's what you have in Genesis 1:1 and 2. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. The ass starts cutting up and bucking and won't go any further, so he takes his stick and starts beating on his ass. And the ass falls down, and he stands